Michael here again, just going through the last part of the assignment with you, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but I think there's a few key points that I really want to make and I want to clear up with you. So the first thing that I'm going to reinforce is the idea that I spoke about before, that actually how you structure it is up to you. So that if you decide to do all your point twos on the experiences and then the strategies, point three, standalone, fine. Or if you want to interlink them into one essay and do experience strategy, that's fine, really. It's not necessarily a problem. Now, the one thing that I'm going to say with that is, no matter which way you do it, you've got to make sure that you relate that experience or theme to the strategy you're going to talk about. Okay, and when I say strategies, I guess pedagogical strategies don't have to be overly grand. I'm not expecting you to come up with a model which is going to change the world. You might just talk about the idea of a strategy being understanding their previous experiences, okay, or giving the students voice, and then giving specific examples how that can happen. But you've got to say that, you know what, one of the specific experience you might be talking about is that specific experience is a religious festival whereby fasting is involved, and therefore the strategy might be to use a model which incorporates a number of different roles for people from that minority ethnic group, from that religious group. Okay, so that will be your specific link between the strategy and the theme. Okay, so you've made that quite clear. Now, just that example is one I've given because if you look in the sport pedagogy book, you'll see that actually in Louise Webb's chapter on ethnicity, she makes that link, and she talks about the idea of sport education, which is a specific strategy whereby participants take on different roles of teacher, coach, performance analyst, players, and so on and so on and so on, referees. It kind of, we'll go into that a little bit in some of the lectures. Now, the reason that she says that that strategy might be effective, if we were to use that example, is that actually during that religious festival, where those individuals have less energy because they're fasting, they can still participate and they can still learn about the sport, but through a different role or through a different way, which will take away the limitation of fasting and having less energy and not being able to focus as much, if that makes sense. So what you can see there is that's quite a simple way of putting it and quite a simple way of doing it. Okay. Now the point that I'm going to make is about relating back to the reading you've done before. And I've mentioned that chapter in the sport pedagogy book, and I've mentioned what Louise Webb says there, and that was just one example. But one of the things that we can relate back to in quite a few ways is this paper here by Husbands and Pearce and those effective strategies. So the idea of pupil voice, I think, will come up for every group, or it might come up in there. I think this idea of effective pedagogy are inclusive and take the diverse needs of the range of learners into the group. You know, that's important. That's useful. So I think these points here, number 1, number 2, 4, 5, 9 might be things that you want to relate to. You might relate to 6, 7, 8, but I think 1, 2, 4, 5, and 9 are those that stand out most for this assignment. Okay, so when you are doing this assessment, I think you could relate back to that reading. You can also relate back to the other reading. So I've talked a lot about ethnicity here, but if you were talking about disability, the Coates and Vickerman paper quite clearly states again about empowering individuals through pupil voice. That's number 2 on that paper, and it's also on the Coates and Vickerman paper. So you could say that actually both Coates and Vickerman and Husbands and Pearce encourage pupil voicing as a strategy for learning, and you can bring them in. So hopefully you can start to shape and mould that. Now you might find other people that do that as well, but that's just something that I wanted to make clear. On that note, I've moved on the next slide to just make a few points. Okay, so really bring those ideas together. So if there's 2 or 3 people that say the same thing or make similar points, do bring that in. The other thing that I'm going to suggest is that you can possibly consider learning theory within there. So if you want to push on and get the marks slightly higher, I would recommend that some of the stuff that Sam covered in his lectures might be worth considering. So we've talked about giving pupils voice. I've briefly mentioned the idea of a sport education model there. Well, something like a sport education model is often seen as a socially constructivist approach to learning, because the students construct the environment, they develop the understanding from their own encounters. So therefore, you might suggest that by developing a socially constructivist approach, which considers scaffolding and social interaction, I am encouraging a positive learning experience of this group. So you might bring that in to your assessment. Now, you don't need to spend a lot of time unpicking constructivism, but you might suggest that engages with that zone of proximal development and scaffolding. Okay. Now, finally, and I'm sorry, I've closed. Okay, so finally, the last thing that you want to do is you don't want to make generalizations. So if you are saying that this strategy might be one way to help people with disabilities maximise their learning, or people from a different ethnicity, or if we're talking about girls in PE and we're saying that actually one of the ways that might help might be to allow them choice over their clothing, and this includes, this comes back to pupil voice. You can't state that this will do it. That if I do this, that all girls in PE will suddenly have a positive experience. You can't make those generalisations, because what we're dealing with here is what we would describe as being qualitative. It's about emotions, it's about experiences. It's not going to happen for everybody, okay? But you can say that it may do this. And be careful to avoid making generalisations, and make sure that you take that tone when you write about this strategy. So this strategy might offer this opportunity, or it might offer this, but we've not done any research to show that it does. We are just taking other people's word for it and saying this might be a way of helping this. Okay, so I'm going to call it a day there. I'm not going to chat on too much. And if you've got any other questions or anything else you want to get onto myself, get onto Sam, get onto Amy, Jason, Stuart, and we will help you guys with assignments. This video isn't just, I'm going to leave it there. So yeah, thank you very much.